All right, let's get started. So welcome everyone. This is the Power Skills Workshop to create a plan to tackle any project. So excited to dig in to some project management tips with you all today. So just to get started, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kelsey, and I'm a Career Services Operations Manager at PathStream. I have 10 years of project management experience, where I've had the privilege of managing many different projects, from working with global companies to small companies, from teams with deep pockets, lots of resources, to small, scrappy teams with tight budgets. I've wore a lot of different titles in the project management field, like project coordinator, project manager, product program manager, and now managing career services and operations at PathStream. So I hope to share some of my experiences with you, and I hope it's helpful for tackling your own projects. So our goal today is to equip you with project management skills and strategies used by experts to help you tackle projects, whether that be in your work life or your community, your personal life. And there's just a quick little stat to show that project management is in demand and growing. It's definitely a growing field, so it's an exciting place to be. So we'll first just do a deep dive into what is project management. So just some foundational definitions to make sure we have a good understanding of what this is. And then we'll move into building a project plan. And then again, we'll open up for Q&A. So to start, we'll start at a basic level. What is a project? So a project is a time-bound endeavor with the goal of creating a unique deliverable. So this deliverable could be a product like an app or a bridge, could be a service like setting up a customer support system, but it could also be just an intangible result like increasing sales by 20%. So very vast in opportunities for projects, but it's really just this time-bound endeavor with a goal in mind to create a unique deliverable. So just a couple examples of projects. They're usually started to achieve some strategic goal. That could be like meeting a regulatory standard, satisfying a stakeholder. So this image is a bridge. So a bridge project might be started if an inspector finds a crack in a bridge. Another example could be maybe your manager asks you to design and create a store display to attract customers. That's another type of example of a project. And then maybe in your community, there's a nonprofit that is starting a food drive to meet the needs of the people. So that's another example. As you can see, there's lots of different types of projects. So we know what a project is, but what is project management now? So project management is the practice of planning and executing a project from start to finish to achieve the goals of the project. So it's the project, you can have your project, but if you're not planning and executing that project, then you're missing out on a huge piece of project management. So we know what a project management is, we know what a project is, but let's talk about the project manager role. So in general, a project manager's goal is to guide the project team through those objectives. And it's a lot like being a coach. So that's the image that I've pulled up here. So as a coach, you're not the one playing the game, you're not out on the court, but you're responsible for designing the plays that you think will help the team win. And you're responsible for motivating the team, keeping them on track. And ultimately, you're held responsible for whether the team wins or loses. So very similar, a project manager's role. You don't execute all of the work, but you are responsible for designing the plan, for motivating and keeping the team on track. And at the end of the day, you're responsible for the project's success. So it's easy to see that project management is a leadership role. It requires seeing the big picture, tracking the small details, and motivating and managing your team. So you can probably see by now, project management is a really big field, and that's great news if you want to get into project management. Almost every field needs project managers. So I've just listed a graphic here that shows a lot of the demand in different industries, but it's definitely not hitting all of them. So you can see almost every field needs project managers, from construction, engineering, financial services, healthcare, law. You can pretty much find a need for project management everywhere. So I want to do a quick poll. So have you managed a project before? So let me just launch this poll real quick. Okay, you should have this up. So 3 easy answers. Have you managed a project before? Yes, no, or not sure. And if you say yes, I would love to know what your biggest challenge is. So add that to the chat. Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, a mixed group, but that's great. So let's dive in, and we'll talk about some of these challenges and maybe some of the ones that weren't brought up. All right, so now that we know just general definitions around project management, let's dive into building a project plan. So I'm starting off with not really talking about project management, but with life cycles. So when you hear life cycle, you might first think of the natural world. So consider a butterfly. You might recall from science classes that the butterfly starts as an egg, then turns into a caterpillar, and then I think it's pronounced chrysalis, and finally a butterfly emerges. So in the natural world, a life cycle is the series of phases through which something passes through its lifetime. And similarly, a project has a life cycle, and it's these series of phases that a project passes through from start to finish. So in the natural world, this happens organically, but in project management, there are processes in place to help move you from these different phases. So this is just a super basic framework. And the one I've outlined here, it's just really basic example, but it shows the different pieces and different phases of a project. This will vary by industry. And so we'll look at a couple examples. So first is a construction example. I'm not in construction, but from just doing a little bit of research, you can find the life cycle of construction projects. So you might have phases like the concept phase, so building your blueprints, to procurement phase, collecting the materials you need, to building, so the actual construction, and then moving into a testing phase, so doing your inspections and quality tests. A software project, so I am more familiar with software projects. They have many different phases. So this could look like the ones I've shared on the screen: some analysis, design, implementation, testing, and launching your project. But really, your phases will just be determined by the nature of your project. So let's just walk through a couple the common phases that I've put here, just to keep it at its most basic level, because it will vary by project. So we're just going to start off with these basic phases. So the first one is starting your project. No surprise there. So think for a second, have you ever tried to get something done without everyone being on the same page? So imagine trying to plan a trip with a group of people and you don't know where you're going. So it might look a lot like this picture here, where everyone is thinking of different directions. And so accomplishing a task with a group of people requires an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, why you're even doing it, and how you will accomplish it. So there obviously is some pre-work that goes into it. So I'm just going to use that store display example that we talked about at the beginning. So if you have come up with this store display, you might need to get approval from your manager, get funding approved for any resources you might need, and make some initial project decisions, like what product you're going to highlight or what brand will be displayed. So just basic questions answered. But one important thing to keep in mind is you don't need all of your questions answered. It does not need to be comprehensive when you're just starting the project out. You just need to know enough so that you can move forward. So in this example, you might not need to have a fully fledged budget, every detail of where you're going to be spending money. You don't need a comprehensive plan built out. So I'm saying this a lot, but it just depends on your project and the type of industry you're working with. But just know at the beginning, you don't need to have all of the details fully fleshed out. So at this point, you might also have all these answers in your head about where you're going to start, but you want to make sure that everyone else has that understanding too. So you want to make sure people are on the same page, people are bought into this project, especially if you need financial resources. So it's important to not just have that information to yourself, but to have it somewhere in a shared space where you can you speak with people about it and help get their buy-in. So one industry accepted tool for a project manager to have in their tool belt is a project charter. So you might have heard of this before, but if you haven't, it's an official document used to help you facilitate this pre-work and get a shared understanding before you get too far in the project. So you don't want to get halfway through your project and then realize that people aren't bought in, or you don't have the financial resources you thought you needed. So really this project charter can help flesh these things out before you get started on your project. So this is a list of things that the project charter can help you define, but really it's just to authorize the project's existence, to formally provide a project and get the organization or the sponsor's commitment to it, to give you authority to assign resources. So if you need a team of people, this can help get that started. And to also be a direct link between the project and the strategic objectives of your organization. So this might sound really complicated, or maybe it sounds really easy, but it's important to do this with collaboration from your sponsor. So you might not have to answer all of these things by yourself, but if you have a manager that's involved in this project, you might lean on them to help you answer some of these things. So definitely don't have to do it alone. And it can be very simple, as simple as a one-page document. And there are tons of online examples for free that you can just download. So I would recommend looking those up. This is a screenshot of a path stream template that we've created for our certificates, but there are plenty online. This is just one basic example from a quick search that I did that just shows how basic it can be. So just simply giving descriptions, bulleting out objectives, your purpose. So hopefully it doesn't seem too tedious. It can at the beginning of the project when you're just ready to jump in, but it's super important so that you can lean on this as you start going into your project. You can lean on this to help you make decisions or help communicate what your project is about to get people bought in. So definitely a great tool. I would recommend, if you're already doing projects and you're not using a charter, to add that to your tool belt. All right, so now that we know how to start a project, let's talk about organizing and preparing the project. So this is just a very basic example, but imagine there are two lumberjacks who each need to cut down a tree. So one might spend 2 hours planning what they're going to do to cut down this tree. They think about which direction the tree should fall, which tool they should use, where they should start cutting. They also enlist the help of an assistant, while the other lumberjack gets straight to work and just starts chopping down the tree with an axe. So after 4 hours, the one who took the time to plan out the process they've cut down the tree and they're relaxing now. But the other lumberjack is still chopping down the tree with a dull axe. So this is just a silly example, but the lesson is that before you begin executing a project, it's important to spend that time preparing and planning so that you can be as efficient as possible. This is just a quote. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. So planning is probably the most critical step of project management. It'll make things smoother and more efficient. It'll prevent missed deadlines, overspending, frustrated team members, lots of mitigation if you just take some time to plan. So what does this look like? So one initial part of organizing is to define what we call baselines. So think of this like a road you're traveling on, and your baselines are the road borders to reach your destination. So it's important to stay aware of your boundaries and coordinate work to ensure that you stay on the road and you're not diverting off of the road. So really like a safety guide to help you get to your goals. And these baselines more specifically, they're typically your scope, budget, and schedule. So this answers questions like what absolutely needs to be done in order for this project to be a success. So that will be your scope. Budget would be how much money can I spend on this project? And your schedule, obviously, how much time do I have to produce this deliverable? So of the three, scope is definitely the more tricky one. The other ones might be given to you by your manager or by your sponsor. So let's dive deeper into the scope baseline. So project scope is the work that the project manager and stakeholders decide as part of the project. So in this image, very basic, but the red box represents the scope of your project. The box shows that projects have a clear boundary for what is included in the project and what's not included. This might sound very simple, but as you get into actually project managing, it's really important to define these borders. And in project management, we call this in scope and out of scope. So scope is aligned to your project goals, and it can be helpful to ask yourself when you've listed out all the work that needs to be done, does this task clearly tie to a goal or outcome of the project? It could be a good thing to do, but if it's not directly aligned to that goal, it's probably out of scope. So we'll look at a brief example. This is a project for a new and improved blue metro line. So things that are in scope for this might be shuttles during the closure, building new tracks, upgrading the signals, and some signage and safety ambassadors to help direct passengers while the closures are happening. So these could be things you've defined up front as in scope, but it's important to define what is not in scope too. So while the tracks will be redone, the trains and train stations will not be upgraded. So that would be out of scope. So understanding these baselines will help you prioritize your project work. For example, if you only have 2 months to complete a project, you can work backwards to decide what can go into that baseline. So what in your scope can fit in 2 months versus what can't. So it can help you decide what would be in scope and what would be out of scope. So yeah, those are baselines. And now we'll jump into building your project schedule. So now that you have these baselines, you know where you're going and which things to stay inside of, in scope, out of scope, you can start actually building out your schedule. So this is just a quick diagram, but we'll go through it in more detail in a minute. But I just wanted to do a quick little, spend a little bit of time just explaining that a project schedule can look at a variety of different ways. So it can be as simple as a to-do list. It can also be a wall of Post-it notes. And if you have budget and resources to purchase an online tool, it can also be something like Asana. So that's what we use, what we teach in the certificate. But it doesn't have to be some fancy tool online. It can be super basic, whatever is going to help you get to your results. So we'll go back to that diagram of building a project schedule. So the first step is to define your activities. So what are the individual tasks that need to be accomplished? So if you're using the Post-it note wall, you can just take all your Post-it notes, write all the tasks down that need to be done. And then you'll move into sequencing. So is there a type of order that these things need to go in? Is there something that is dependent on another task being done? So you want to put those in order. And then you'll want to estimate the duration of these activities. So is something like a 1-day task? Will something take a week or more? So it's important to just have a good idea of how big these tasks are. And in this example, I've just done like t-shirt sizing. That's kind of a common method that we use at PowStream. So just saying, is this an extra small, a small, a large, and having some sort of general idea of how big those things are. So extra small might be less than a day, but you want some understanding of how long each task will take. And then finally, the fun part for me, organizing your tasks into a schedule. So now you know how long things are going to take, which order they should go in. And so it could look something like this. So you've organized it into weeks 1 through 4 and all of your tasks. This might be a point in time where you realize you have too many tasks for the amount of time. So this might be a conversation of redefining what is in scope and out of scope, or if you might need to ask for more time to accomplish all the things that's being asked. So it's a good time before you're executing these tasks to facilitate that conversation. All right, so now it's time to put your plan into action. This phase will be much more smooth if you've taken those prior phases seriously, done your charter, organized your tasks. Really, this should be about just executing the schedule that you've already made. So as a project manager, you now put on your coaching hat. You're responsible for managing the time, money, people in this project, keeping all your stakeholders up to date on the progress, delivering results. But this is much easier said than done. So we're going to talk through what reality might look like for projects. So you can do the most planning, but things will go wrong. Things will go in a different way than you expected. And that's okay. So this is where I like to say project managers can really shine by managing through uncertainty. So just know that as much as you plan, some things you just can't anticipate, and that's okay. So to help with this, there are a lot of different strategies that work well. Some that I've seen work well and that I like to do with my teams are called daily stand-up meetings. If you haven't heard this before, it's a meeting where really people, it got the name because people actually stand up during the meeting to help keep a very short meeting. So this might be a 5 to 10 minute meeting at the beginning of your day to get the whole team together and just talk through what you completed yesterday, what you are planning to complete today, and if you're blocked on anything. So it should be very short. People are standing up and want to go sit down, they might go through their task faster, which is great. So this is really the project manager's time to make sure tasks are on schedule and to really be made aware if there are any blockers. So if anyone says, you know, I can't move forward on this task because of X, Y, and Z, that's a great trigger for you to immediately make that a priority for your day to help them get unblocked or unstuck. So yeah, definitely this is a daily meeting, takes really little to no time. It can also be like an instant message with your team. We do that too whenever we're virtual. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Also, weekly planning meetings. So you might spend 5 minutes a day in the morning doing your stand-ups, but it's good to also have a little bit more time on a weekly basis or bi-weekly, fortnightly basis to just take time to make sure everything that's been planned previously, like the previous week, was accomplished, and then to give the team the next set of tasks for the following week or amount of time that you've planned. So this is another good time if concerns come up and you're not finding this out at the end of the project, you are talking with the team on a weekly basis, also to make sure you're aware of anything that you might need to help resolve. This is just a note that constant communication is key. So you have these other meetings, but things might come up in the middle of someone's day that they're blocked on, or they have a question that they can't get around. So allowing different forms of communication to be available is really important. So usually I might have like some central location, like in our instant messaging system, like Slack, we might have a channel specific to this project, or just making sure the team is clear on how to surface these issues before waiting till the next day. So this is a good way to just stay informed with your team. But on the other side, your job is also to keep external stakeholders informed. So make sure you have a way, you know, how your manager and the leaders at your company or in your community want to be informed, because you'll need to do both ways of communication. And then finally, documentation. So this might seem tedious too in the moment, but documentation is very critical, especially after the project. So a lot will be happening during the project, like people accomplishing tasks. So it could be really important to know which tasks are done and by who completed the task, because later there might be an issue that comes up. And so documenting who accomplished the tasks will make it really easy to go back to who should I reach out to help resolve this new issue that's come up. And another documentation tip, so during this phase, there will be tons of decisions being made, big, small, and some things won't seem big enough to like add to your charter. But later, someone might want to know why you've made the decision you've made. If you pivoted on a decision, it's critical to write that down so that you can remember later why you made that decision. So hopefully that was helpful for how to execute and carry out your project work. So now we'll go to the last phase, end of the project. You've made it. So you're crossing the finish line, but there's still a couple more steps that you need to do for this phase. So depends on the project, but a few steps are universal. First is, I would just call this a quality check. So once you're done with all of your tasks, did you actually do the things you set out to do? So you can take your project charter where you defined your deliverables and your objectives and just make sure that you met them all. So it's a miss if you get to the end of your project and you didn't meet them all. So just make sure they were all met. You might also reference your plan, not only to make sure you met the deliverables, but did you stay in scope, on budget? So this is a good time to just do that quick gut check. But you really should be doing that all along the way, but this is just like one final check. Another one, polishing and finalizing. So you might have some documentation that you're going to be sending to the end user. So you want to make sure you're making a good first impression. All your documentation is clean, ready for external eyes. you've closed out financial obligations, sent people their checks. So just tidying up loose ends. And then delivery. So actually delivering the finished product or service. So turning on your software project, making it live, or sending in, whatever deliverable that is, actually delivering it. And then finally, hindsight is 2020. So definitely take a moment to regroup. You can see more clearly what happened in the past after a project is over, but you want to take a few minutes with your team to think about what happened during the project, what went wrong, what could be improved, what went really well for the team. So this is great not only to just build some camaraderie with your team and do some celebration, but to also help you for future projects. What's something that you learned in this project that can help you with future projects or help your organization in future projects? So this is just really important to discuss and record, write it down, and make sure that's shared among your team.